and welcome to Lunar Nebula Reading Channel. I'm Brian Petrilli, aka Jalanon, and I'm going through an author profile of Will Wight today. The guy's also got a blog online where you can read more about what he's been up to and what he's written. I've read about 2 of his series in full. His Elder Empire Shadow series, which is written in parallel to the C series. That series is basically, you see the same events from 2 different perspectives, as far as I can understand it. But once again, I've only read Elder Empire Shadow. I've also finished the Traveler's Gate trilogy and the novellas from after it. And I've read about half the Cradle series, which is his most popular one. And he's going to have about 12 books in that when he's finished. I believe he's published 9 at the moment. He first started publishing at least the ebooks in December 2014, and he's been releasing stuff off and on, and he basically finished the Elder Empire series last year, and frankly, that's probably my favorite series, so I'm glad he finished that, and I was able to read that recently. Yeah, for parents, though, what you might want to know about his series, usually they have this kind of darker protagonist who's living in a very ruthless world, and they've usually got a pretty good heart underneath it all, but they've also learned that basically if anything stands in their way, they're going to take it down. Yes, we'll start with the Elder Empire Shadow series. So online, it's recommended for ages like 13 through 18. I think that's a decent range. I would personally say probably high school enough, just because there's enough violence in there and a lot of creepy monsters. The basic premise of the Elder Empire is that once upon a time, humanity was ruled over by these monstrous alien creatures called Elders, or the Great Elders, because there's a lot of different stuff that could be considered alien in this world. Humanity fought back, right? And the man who led humanity was known as the Emperor, eventually. And he finds a way to basically be immortal in order to protect humanity from these great elders and their influence. And where the events of Elder Empire Shadow start, we basically find out the protagonist has killed the Emperor, and things are kind of falling apart. There's all sorts of conflicts happening between guilds, and so on and so forth. The series is told mostly in the present, but there's a lot of flashback chapters as well to kind of fill in the blanks and let you kind of know how did this present form. So I enjoyed that. I didn't find it too distracting or anything, and I think separating it out in different chapters really made that easier to kind of leap between the times, and they're denoted pretty clearly in this series. I would say in the ebook that I was reading, the first book of this series, Elder Empire Shadow and Sea is the actual title. I would say the basic layout of the book seemed a little lacking in some ways. Like some of the little section breaks, even within the chapters, seem to be placed weirdly. So I think either the publisher wasn't used to the layout systems for ebooks yet, or maybe they just missed some things. I'm not sure. But it did seem better later in the series. So I didn't notice any kind of unnatural section breaks of different icons or anything like that in the future books, 2 and 3. But yeah, in the first book, that might be a little off-putting, but I'd still say it's definitely worth it. Other things you may want to know about the book. Will Wight always has, fantastical world. His protagonist, who's, once again, usually kind of ruthless in some way or another, but generally somebody likable. So in this one, we follow Shira, the gardener, which gardening, in this sense, is actually more assassinating and pruning the weeds, shall we say, of the Empire. She would much prefer a nap to working, but she's found that doing her job well lets her get back to napping faster, so basically she becomes the best assassin ever in order to nap more often. Anyway, other than that, once again, I haven't read the Elder Empire C series, but we do see that series protagonist Calder Martin from Shira's viewpoint in this series, and they clash a lot. And once again, I would say this is my favorite world building of Will Wight's series, and there's a few different magical systems in play that kind of all relate to this idea of intent, where the idea is as somebody uses an item or an item gets a bunch of history, it can start to take on magical properties, so to speak. So let's say there's a knife that's been handed down from assassins from several thousand years ago over and over and over again to new assassins, and it keeps getting used. Well, the knives basically get more and more adept at what they're used for. And so you could have this old bronze knife and it could be better than a new steel knife because of how people have invested it with their intent over and over again throughout the years. So that's a pretty interesting system. One thing that might be confusing to new readers is that there are other kind of indigenous monstrous creatures in the Elder Empire called Chimera. So they're technically not these otherworldly alien creatures, but they're like the more traditional magical creatures in some ways. There are people who then sometimes graft parts of those creatures onto themselves in order to gain new abilities. That's another sort of form of magic, you could say. There's also alchemy present in this book, which is interesting. It's never really explored in depth, but it is used for some fun gimmicks and things. Other than that, there's also reading, which is basically the ability to read intent in objects or to read objects' history. And there are other more powerful forms of reading that I will not spoil. But those are the main magic systems. Other than, of course, the Great Elders, they kind of go beyond the normal rules of any magic. And that's their point, right? Is that they're these alien creatures that are so ancient and unknowable that you would go insane trying to figure out what's going on with it. So I would say the Elder Empire is kind of like if Lovecraft and Brent Weeks made a book together. You know? You have kind of Lovecraftian horror monsters that would drive people insane in this fun fantasy world where there's all this political intrigue that the main character is kind of like, I don't really care, but I have to. So, oh well. So once again, I would say the Elder Empire series has some more gruesome stuff like zombies made out of a bunch of different people. They're called Children of Nkothi. The dead mother is Nkothi. And she was this great elder that would basically turn human corpses into new creations and drive people insane and blah blah blah. So yeah, I would say high school and up, once again, for most of Will Wight's series. Especially this one, just based on kind of the horror aspect of these great elders. Moving on, the next series I'll talk about is the Traveler's Gate Trilogy, which was, I believe, the first series he actually wrapped up, and may have actually written before the Elder Empire, I'm not sure. It was published later, I think 2015, but it does feel like the least well put together, I'll say. It feels a bit like he jumps around in time sometimes. Some of the Goodreads reviews you may look up don't always look at it well, or they don't like how the characters develop initially. And I think part of that is maybe they didn't go through the whole trilogy, because I would say the characters do make sense as they develop when you read the whole trilogy. Like, the main character is Simon, and Simon is a normal human being in a world where people basically have superpowers and are known as travelers, and they get these powers by traveling to other planes of existence, and then being more and more in tune with that world or plane of existence, they gain more and more powers. It's basically Magic the Gathering meets normal fantasy genre stuff, and I would say it's very fun. Like it's a fun world building thing. If you want more of like a hard magic system like Brandon Sanderson's, I would say no, this is more of a soft magic system, where the ideas aren't fully like laid out for you as to what people can and can't do in terms of like how you progress through power. But even then, the rules are pretty clear that you have to be able to travel to this new place or this new world, and then you have to interact with that world in such a fashion as to take on its values, and then you can gain access to new powers. So, for example, the House of Blades, which is the title of the first book, is where Simon goes, eventually, to gain powers. And in the House of Blades, the idea is you have to earn everything, including, basically you have to earn the ability to live and sleep. So periodically these creatures called the Nigh, which are kind of like Dementors with chains wrapped around themselves, are like living cloths that, yeah, they'll just try to kill you. And, you know, if you survive, they're like, okay, we'll leave you alone for a bit. And if you don't, then you probably didn't belong in this house anyway. So, once again, kind of a ruthless world. But there's some very fun moments in there as well. I don't want to spoil anything, but Kai, Simon's eventual reluctant teacher, has some funny things in there as well, where he kind of constantly takes care of these little children's dolls and things like that. And so on and so forth. But basically, there are 3 protagonists in a way. Most of the time you're following Simon. I don't want to spoil too much, but their stories intertwine and weave throughout the years that pass in the Traveler's Gate trilogy. And once again, I think the way time passes, he'll just kind of skip to the important plot points. It didn't feel nearly as well fleshed out as the Elder Empire's way of doing flashbacks. And I don't know if that's because this was written first and he was getting used to it. No. I would still say very fun series. I enjoyed it. But once again, for parents, kind of look out for the violence. There is some cursing in all of his series. And kind of that whole ruthless attitude of kill or be killed, and I gotta get stronger in order to protect the people I care about in this crazy world. Other than that, once again, he does skip around in time in order to keep the plot moving at a good pace. And I think that's, you know, a decent idea. I would say the novellas he created are actually my favorite part of this series. They go deeper into the world building of the different planes of existence or the different worlds that people travel to. They also flesh out some of the side characters in the Traveler's Gate trilogy. And yeah, they're just really good stories. So if you're going to start anywhere, maybe start with the novellas, see if you like that, and then maybe go into the Traveler's Gate, kind of expecting that you're going to be following this young protagonist who basically experiences quite a bit of trauma, and then decides he's going to do something about it by finally becoming a traveler. And you may need to be a little bit patient with that protagonist as he tries to keep up with all his responsibilities and then go off on this adventure, right? On to the final series, his most popular series, the Cradle series. So it is basically, hopefully I will pronounce this correctly, Xianxia, which is like martial arts fantasy with cultivation elements. A good way to learn more about Xianxia, Wuxia, all that stuff is probably Tao Wang's blog, My Life, My Tao, or Tao. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. He also does a lot of lit RPG stuff, and the Journey of a Thousand Steps series, which I think is also Xianxia. And the idea behind that genre is basically martial arts in a fantasy world setting, whereas wuxia, as I understand it, is more like super heroic martial artists in a historical setting. You know, Cradle series is definitely more of a fantastic setting, and you once again start with your protagonist who's kind of down on his luck. He has a condition where he is known as Unsouled. No one really thinks of him as being able to contribute or be able to become a martial artist with any skill, and so he's constantly trying to find opportunities to get stronger, and he never gives up. Weishi Linden is the guy's name, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. And what's funny is basically he is constantly described as, like, even with his resting face, looking like he's spoiling for a fight. Just like naturally he looks like a thug, basically. Whereas he's actually this very thoughtful guy who's just trying to figure out how to get stronger so he can survive being randomly punched by people who don't like him, sort of thing. And so the Cradle series is in this wondrous, fantastical world where there is a bunch of fantasy creatures, there are martial artists everywhere with different fantastical powers that they've worked very hard to cultivate, and once again, note for parents, a lot of the characters are very much in moral gray areas where it's, you know, kill or be killed. You try to take care of the people that you care about. There's a lot of the ends justify the means mentalities in there, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I would say if you want a lot of books to read, Cradle series is definitely a good one, and once you start, you won't really want to stop. Bear that in mind, and there are currently 9 books out, I believe, so that may be changing shortly. I think he's working on book 10 right now. Yeah, once he's done with the Cradle series at book 12, he's planned, he said he'll try to do a second Traveler's Gate trilogy, or start a new series, it sounds like. So, yeah, if you're interested in more of his stuff, you can, once again, check out his blog. I think it's a blog of devious intent. Or you can just look up Will Wight online. And Wight is once again spelled W-I-G-H-T, like the fantastical undead monster. But yeah, at any rate, I would say I've enjoyed my time with Will Wight's books. And I think he keeps growing as an author, which is fantastic and awesome. And I've always enjoyed his worlds, and I think his characters are great. And I think people will enjoy spending time with it as long as they're willing to give it a chance. Once again, I would say Elder Empire, if you kind of like the more like Lovecraftian horror stuff, that might be the place to start for you. And if you enjoy kind of teenagers growing up, figuring out their place in a crazy world, you might like Traveler's Gate. And if you just want to go on this crazy martial arts journey where you meet all sorts of wacky characters that are just pretty amazing and do their own thing. It's also got a very good power scaling where basically in the first book you learn, you know, what's the lowest of the low power scale, Weishi Linden basically, the main character, and what's the highest of the height he can reach. And I don't want to spoil anything, but basically he will meet somebody who is kind of at that highest power scale that anybody knows about within that first book. So you know what he's reaching for, which is one of those things that a lot of anime and manga do struggle with, is the constant power scaling, right? So when you know what your end point is, you have a better chance of reaching it. And I would say, yeah, Cradle series, very good. So, if you've enjoyed this author profile, leave a like, subscribe to see or hear more different reading videos, and let me know if there's anything else you want me to do, like go into more detail on one of these books or one of these series. I think they've been out long enough that I don't think it'd be spoiling too much if I go in deeper, but once again, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I hope you have a great day, dear reader.